love, pain, truth.
The neighborhood of Oak Ridge was the kind of place where nothing ever really happened, which was exactly how everyone liked it. The lawns were manicured to perfection, the mailboxes were painted in matching colors, and the biggest scandal of the year usually involved someone putting their trash bins out a day early. But there was one spot on the street that didn't fit the picture-perfect vibe. It was the last house on the left, standing apart from the others with a rusted gate and an overgrown garden. The man who lived there was named Elias. He was a mystery that had been brewing on the street for nearly a decade. He was a giant of a man, broad-shouldered and usually hunched over, with a thick beard that hid most of his face. He always wore the same dark, heavy coat, regardless of the weather. He didn't wave back when people drove by, and he never attended the block parties. To the residents of Oak Ridge, Elias wasn't just a quiet neighbor. He was a source of fear. Parents would pull their children closer when they walked past his house, whispering that he was dangerous or that he had a dark past he was hiding. The neighborhood gossip group, led mostly by a woman named Mrs. Higgins who lived across the street, had made up 100 stories about him. They said he kept weapons in the basement. They said he was running from the law. The truth was, nobody knew him, and fear of the unknown had turned him into a monster in their minds. It was a Tuesday evening in late November when the sky turned a strange, bruised purple. The weather report had warned of a storm, but no one expected it to hit with such violence. The wind picked up, howling through the trees and ripping branches off the oaks that lined the street. Then came the rain. It wasn't a gentle drizzle. It was a wall of water that slammed into the roofs and windows, drowning out the sound of the televisions inside the cozy homes. A few blocks away, a young woman named Mia was driving a small, battered sedan that was clearly not built for this kind of weather. Maya was new to the area. She had moved here trying to escape a difficult life in the city, hoping for a fresh start where nobody knew her name. She was tired, stressed, and now absolutely terrified. Her car had been sputtering for miles, but she had hoped to make it home. Suddenly, there was a loud clunk, and the engine died. The steering wheel locked up, and the car drifted helplessly to the side of the road, stopping just feet away from the sidewalk. Mia tried to restart the car, but it just clicked at her uselessly. She grabbed her phone, desperate to call for a tow truck or a friend, but the screen was black. The battery was dead. She was alone, stranded in the dark, with rain hammering against the metal roof like it was trying to break in. She looked out the window. The street was unfamiliar. She didn't know which house was safe to knock on. She was soaking wet just from the sprint from her car to a covered porch, shivering uncontrollably. She walked down the street, looking for a sign of life. Most of the houses were dark, the families already asleep or hunkered down in the back rooms. Then she saw a faint yellow glow coming from the porch of a large, imposing house at the end of the road. It was the only light she could see. Her heart hammered in her chest. She knew this house. Even in her newness to the area, she had heard the whispers about the scary man who lived there. But the wind was biting now, cutting through her thin jacket, and she felt like she was freezing from the inside out. Fear of the storm began to outweigh her fear of the stranger. With trembling hands, she walked up the cracked pathway. There was no doorbell, just an old iron knocker. She lifted it, her hand shaking, and let it fall. Clang! The sound echoed, swallowed immediately by the wind. She waited, terrified that he would open it, and equally terrified that he wouldn't. Inside the house, Elias was sitting in his armchair, reading a book in the quiet. He wasn't used to visitors. He preferred his solitude. When he heard the knock, he frowned. He assumed it was kids playing a prank or maybe someone lost looking for directions. He put his book down and walked heavily to the door. He unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy wood door open. Standing there was a young woman, drenched from head to toe, her hair plastered to her face. Mascara running down her cheeks from tears or rain, he couldn't tell which. She looked small and fragile against the backdrop of the raging storm. Elias looked at her. He didn't say anything at first. He just saw the fear in her eyes. He saw the way she hugged herself to keep warm. Without a word, he stepped aside and held the door open wider, gesturing for her to come in. It wasn't a friendly gesture. It was a practical one. He didn't want her to freeze on his porch. Mia hesitated for a split second. The man looked enormous in the dim light of the hallway, his shadow stretching out toward her. But a gust of wind nearly knocked her over, and she stumbled inside. As soon as she crossed the threshold, Elias shut the door firmly, locking out the cold and the noise. Across the street, Mrs. Higgins was sitting in her living room with the curtains slightly parted. She was watching the storm, making sure no trees were falling on her property, when she saw the silhouette of a girl approach the scary house. She held her breath. She saw the door open, the large figure of Elias appear, and the girl disappear inside. Then the door slammed shut, and the porch light went out. Mrs. Higgins gasped. She didn't see a rescue. She saw a trap. In her mind, the story was already writing itself. The strange recluse had lured a young girl inside. The thought made her blood run cold. She immediately picked up her cordless phone and dialed the number for the neighborhood watch group leader. She didn't wait for a hello. "You won't believe what just happened," she whispered into the phone, her voice trembling with excitement and dread. "He finally did it. The weirdo at the end of the street. He took a girl. I saw her go in, and she hasn't come out." The rumor mill started spinning instantly. While inside the house, Mia sat trembling on a chair, wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, unaware that the real danger wasn't inside the room with her, but in the minds of the people watching from across the street. Inside the old Victorian house, the silence was heavy, but it wasn't the scary kind of silence that Mia had imagined. It was a peaceful quiet, broken only by the crackling of the fire Elias had started in the wood stove. Mia sat in a large, worn-out armchair, wrapped in a thick wool blanket that smelled of cedar and safety. She was still shaking, but the cold was leaving her bones. Elias moved around the room slowly. He didn't ask her questions. He didn't ask her name or why she was crying in the rain. He just acted. He disappeared into the kitchen for a few minutes and came back with a steaming mug of hot cocoa. He placed it on the table near her hand, careful not to touch her or crowd her space. Then he sat down in a chair across the room, picked up a book and started reading. It was the most ordinary thing in the world, but to Mia, it felt surreal. Here was the man the entire street whispered about, acting with more gentle manners than anyone she had met in the city. As the night went on, Mia's breathing slowed down. She looked around the room. It wasn't a dungeon or a torture chamber, as the rumors often suggested. It was just a home. It was cluttered, yes, full of books and old tools, but it was warm. On a small table by the window, she saw a framed photograph of a younger Elias in a military uniform, smiling with a dog. She realized then that he wasn't a monster. He was just a person who had seen too much and wanted to be left alone. When she finally fell asleep in the chair, Elias didn't disturb her. He simply got up, placed another log on the fire, and turned down the lamp so she could rest better. Outside, however, the atmosphere was becoming toxic. The storm had passed, leaving the streets wet and shiny. But a different kind of storm was brewing inside the minds of the neighbors. Mrs. Higgins hadn't slept a wink. She had been sitting by her window, curtains pulled back just an inch, watching the house like a hawk. Every time a light flickered inside Elias's home, she took notes. When the living room light went out, she was convinced it meant something terrible was happening in the dark. By morning, she wasn't just worried. She was on a mission. She was convinced that she was the only thing standing between that poor girl and a horrible fate. By noon, the neighborhood grapevine was working overtime. The story had grown legs. First, it was that a girl had gone inside. Then, someone added that they heard screaming. Another person claimed they saw Elias carrying a body-shaped bundle into the house. It didn't matter that none of this was true. Fear is a powerful thing, and it spreads much faster than the truth. People drove slowly past Elias's house, craning their necks to see something. Anything. Some even parked down the street, watching with binoculars. It became a spectacle. The quiet street of Oak Ridge, usually so respectful of privacy, had turned into a vigilante camp. They weren't seeing a man helping a stranger. They were seeing a villain holding a victim. The second day arrived. And still, Mia did not come out. Inside, Mia was explaining her situation to Elias. The storm had kept them trapped. But her fear was about more than just the rain. She told him about the car breaking down, but she also hinted at the life she was running from a controlling relationship, a feeling of being hunted, nowhere safe to go. Elias listened. He didn't say much, just a grunt or a nod now and then, but his eyes were sharp. When he stood up and walked to his phone in the hallway, Mia froze, wondering if he was calling the police or someone to take her back. But when he returned, he simply said, "I know a place. It's safe. They can help." He spent the afternoon on the phone in the kitchen, his voice low. He wasn't calling the police, whom he didn't trust. He was calling old connections, people from his past life, a network of folks who helped people who needed to disappear for their own safety. He was arranging for Mia to get to a shelter 2 towns over, a place where her abuser wouldn't think to look. But outside, the patience of the mob had run out. It was around 4 in the afternoon when a group of about 10 residents gathered at the edge of Elias's lawn. Mrs. Higgins was at the front, wearing a determined expression, flanked by a couple of other neighbors who usually kept to themselves but were now swept up in the hysteria. "We can't just wait anymore," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice shaking but loud. "It's been 2 days. Anything could be happening to her." "He's probably got her tied up in the basement," a younger man added. He's probably got her tied up in the basement. A younger man tied up in the basement. A younger man added, clutching a baseball bat he clearly didn't know how to use. "We have to do something." They didn't call the authorities because, deep down, they knew they had no real proof. The police would ask questions, check the house, and leave when they found nothing wrong. Mrs. Higgins wanted to be the hero. She wanted to catch him in the act. The group convinced themselves that they were performing a citizen's arrest. They marched up the cracked walkway, their hearts pounding with a mix of adrenaline and self-righteousness. They reached the porch. The wood creaked under their weight. Mrs. Higgins stepped up to the door and raised her hand to knock. She hesitated for just a second, the reality of what she was doing sinking in. She was about to bang on the door of a man she had ignored for 10 years, accusing him of a terrible crime. But then she thought of the poor girl inside, and her fear turned back into anger. She pounded on the door. "Bang, bang, bang. Open up!" she shouted. "We know you have her in there." Inside the house, the noise was jarring. Mia jumped up from the couch, her eyes wide with panic. The sounds of the angry mob brought back all the trauma she was trying to escape. She started backing away, looking for a place to hide. Elias stood up from the kitchen table. He didn't look surprised. He had seen them gathering from the window. He sighed, a deep, tired sound that seemed to come from his boots. He walked past Mia and placed a heavy, reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Stay here," he said softly. "I'll handle this." He walked to the front door, his heavy footsteps thudding on the floorboards. He unlocked the deadbolt with a sharp click. The group outside took a step back, tightening their grip on their imaginary weapons. They braced themselves for a fight, expecting a monster to come roaring out. Elias pulled the door open. He loomed in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the view into the house. He looked down at Mrs. Higgins and her neighbors. His face was blank, giving them nothing. But before anyone could speak, a voice came from behind him. "It's okay," the voice said, clear and steady. The neighbors froze. Elias stepped aside, and Mia walked into the doorway. She was wearing dry clothes, holding a mug of tea, and she looked perfectly calm. She looked from the scared, angry faces on the porch to the man standing beside her. The silence that fell over the group was deafening. They stood there, mouths open, their weapons lowered, completely exposed by the truth. The silence that fell over the small group on the porch was heavy and uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Mrs. Higgins stood frozen, her hand still half raised in the air as if she was about to knock again. The man holding the baseball bat slowly lowered it to his side, looking at the ground, suddenly incredibly interested in his own shoes. Mia stood in the doorway, framed by the light from the hallway. She didn't look like a victim. She didn't look like someone who had been held against her will for 2 days. She looked tired, yes, but she also looked safe. She was wearing a clean, dry sweatshirt that was clearly too big for her. The sleeves hung over her hands, and she was holding a mug of tea with both hands, letting the warmth seep into her palms. The steam from the cup drifted up between her and the neighbors. "Is everything okay here?" Mrs. Higgins finally managed to squeak out, though her voice lacked the conviction it had just a moment ago. We were worried. We saw you go in during the storm, and you didn't come out." Mia looked at the woman, then at the others standing behind her. She saw the fear in their eyes, but it wasn't fear for her. It was fear of being wrong. She realized they hadn't come to save her. They had come to validate their own suspicions about the man standing silently behind her. "Everything is fine," Mia said, her voice steady but loud enough to be heard over the wind. "My car broke down around the corner during the storm. I had nowhere to go. I was soaking wet and freezing. Elias saw me. He didn't have to open the door, but he did. He gave me a place to sleep. He gave me food, and he let me use his phone to figure out what to do next." The neighbors shifted nervously. They exchanged glances, the story falling apart in front of them. The monster they had invented was clashing with the reality of a young woman standing in a warm sweater, holding tea. "But," the man with the bat stammered, trying to find a reason for his anger. "We heard things. People said he was dangerous. You can't be too careful these days." Elias took a small step forward then. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, a towering presence next to Mia. He placed a hand gently on the doorframe, not blocking Mia, but letting her know he was there if she needed him. Mia looked up at Elias, then back at the crowd. "The only thing I was afraid of," she said, her voice hardening just a little, "was the storm. And frankly, standing out here with you guys right now is scarier than anything that happened inside that house." The shame on Mrs. Higgins' face was visible even in the dim light. Her cheeks turned a deep shade of red. "You don't know him," Mia continued. "You all live on this street, right next to him, but you don't know a single thing about him. While you were all hiding behind your curtains, making up stories about him, he was helping me. He's actually a retired surgeon. He spent 30 years saving lives in war zones. He has nightmares because of the things he's seen, not because he's a criminal. He just wants to be left alone." The shock rippled through the group. A surgeon? A war hero? The man they called the weirdo, and the creep, was actually the most qualified person on the street to handle an emergency. Mrs. Higgins looked like she might cry. All the judgment, all the nasty gossip over the years, it suddenly felt incredibly stupid. They had tormented a quiet war hero because he didn't mow his lawn often enough. Just then, the sound of a taxi engine broke the tension. A yellow cab pulled into the driveway, its tires crunching on the gravel. It was the ride Elias had called for her. He had arranged for her to go to a safe house in a neighboring town where she could stay until she got back on her feet. Far away from the trouble she was running from. Mia turned around to Elias. "That's my ride," she said softly. Elias nodded. He didn't say goodbye or be safe. He just reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded $20 bill. He pressed it into her hand. "For the taxi," he grunted. "Get something hot to eat on the way." Mia smiled at him, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. She reached up and gave the big gruff man a hug. It was a brief hug, over in a second, but the meaning was clear. She squeezed his arm and whispered, "Thank you. You saved me." Elias looked awkward, patting her shoulder gently before pulling away. He watched her walk down the path, open the taxi door, and get in. As the car pulled away and taillights faded down the street, he turned back to the group on his porch. He didn't yell. He didn't shout at them to get off his property. He didn't demand an apology. He just looked at them with eyes that were tired and sad. He looked at Mrs. Higgins, then at the man with the bat. He let the silence hang there for a long moment, letting them feel the weight of their own behavior. Then, without a word, he turned, stepped back into his hallway, and closed the door. Click. The lock didn't slam with aggression. It just clicked shut, closing his world off from them again. The neighbors stood on the porch for a long time after the door closed. No one spoke. The adrenaline had drained away, leaving only a hollow feeling of embarrassment. The man with the bat tucked it under his arm, looking like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. Mrs. Higgins stared at the wood grain of the door, realizing she would never be able to look at Elias the same way again. They walked down the driveway slowly, their heads hung low. The excitement of the rescue mission was gone, replaced by a bitter lesson in judgment. As they dispersed back to their perfect houses, the street felt different. The scary house at the end of the road didn't look so scary anymore. It looked like a home. For the next few weeks, things on Willow Creek Lane changed. The gossip about Elias stopped completely. When he walked to the mailbox, people didn't cross to the other side of the street. They didn't wave because they knew he didn't want that. But they stopped staring. Mrs. Higgins even left a basket of apples on his porch one morning. Though she ran away before he could open the door, Elias never mentioned the incident to anyone, and he never thanked the neighbors for their concern. He didn't need to.